August 6, 1945, 8:15 in the morning. Inside the Imperial General Headquarters in Tokyo, one decoded message from Hiroshima destroyed 3 years of comfortable assumptions about how modern war worked. What the Japanese High Command read forced them to face a truth they had ignored the entire war. The United States had never been fighting at full strength. They had held back. Beneath the Imperial Palace, the main war room sat 90 feet underground behind 4-foot-thick concrete walls. On that morning, August 6, 1945, the place carried the usual atmosphere of a war that was slowly slipping away. Field Marshal Shinroko Hada's daily briefing had become a routine reminder of shrinking options. At exactly 8:15, Communications Officer Lieutenant Colonel Tishiro Yamamoto rushed through the heavy steel door without even bowing, something unheard of. In his hands was a decoded message that would completely change how Japan's leaders understood the conflict. It was only a partial transmission from the Hiroshima Regional Military Command, cut off before anyone could finish. The entire city was destroyed by a single bomb. The blast area is far larger than any previous attack. Unknown weapon. Casualties are overwhelming. Request immediate. The message stopped mid-sentence. General Yoshiro Yamizu, head of the Imperial General Staff, read the report 3 times. His first thought was that a massive U.S. firebombing raid, maybe 500 B-29s, had hit Hiroshima all at once. Anything else seemed mathematically impossible. Hiroshima held 350,000 people across 27 square miles. But more information came in over the morning, and the picture changed. Weather scouts reported only 3 B-29s over Hiroshima. Not 303. Admiral Seimu Toyota, head of the Naval General Staff, stood at the large wall map showing U.S. forces across the Pacific. His intelligence team had become very good at predicting American operations. They knew bomber patterns, payloads, and what kind of destruction to expect. Nothing in 3 years of war suggested 3 planes could wipe out an entire city. By 10 a.m., Japanese reconnaissance planes trying to reach Hiroshima reported something no one had ever seen. Pilots described a giant mushroom-shaped cloud rising over 40,000 feet into the sky, visible from 150 miles away. The cloud glowed with strange colors, purples and oranges, shifting like it had light inside it. At 11:30 a.m., Foreign Minister Shigenori Togo received the first eyewitness account from a railway worker who had been 15 miles outside the city. According to his statement, recorded by Togo's secretary, there had been a flash brighter than anything he had ever seen, like 1,000 suns, and then a shockwave strong enough to throw trains off their tracks. He said the center of the city was simply gone, replaced by a massive firestorm visible from the hills. The Supreme War Council met that afternoon at 1400 hours in total silence. Prime Minister Kentaro Suzuki, who had already survived more than one assassination attempt for suggesting peace talks, read the reports. His hands shook slightly as he put them down. "Gentlemen," Suzuki said softly, "we must think carefully about what this means." General Korechika Anami, the war minister and the strongest voice for continuing the fight, spoke immediately. "This is American propaganda. They want us to believe they have a new weapon they do not actually possess. Hiroshima was destroyed by a normal bombing raid, and they are twisting the story." Before he could continue, Admiral Toyota cut him off, something he would never normally do. 3 aircraft, enemy-san. Our radar watched them. Our observers saw them. 3. The room went silent. The weight of the truth settled over them like dust from a collapsing volcano. For 3 years, the Japanese strategy was built on one idea. American factories could be beaten by Japanese spirit and clever tactics. The U.S. could make more planes, ships, and tanks, but Japan believed its soldiers would fight so fiercely that American losses would eventually become too high to accept. This belief shaped every major decision since Pearl Harbor. When the U.S. built 300,000 planes, Japan told itself its pilots had 10 times the fighting spirit. When American shipyards produced cargo ships faster than German submarines could sink them, Japan reminded itself that American crews lacked the warrior mindset. But a single bomb that could erase a city suggested something far worse. It meant American science and industry had reached a point where Japanese resistance wasn't just difficult, it was pointless. It suggested the U.S. had been creating new weapons in secret while still running a war across 2 oceans. It meant everything Japan believed about modern warfare was outdated. At 1600 hours, Intelligence officer Colonel Hideaki Sato presented the day's analysis. His team had tracked American production numbers since 1941, and their estimates were always accurate and always frightening. The U.S. had built 88,410 tanks. Japan had built only 6,450. America launched 41 aircraft carriers. Japan launched 15. American shipyards produced cargo ships faster than German U-boats could sink them. But Sato's new assessment shattered everything. If, he said quietly, the Americans can destroy entire cities with a single bomb, then comparing numbers no longer matters. We are not fighting the same type of war they are fighting. Foreign Minister Togo voiced what everyone else was afraid to say. And if they have one bomb, we must assume they have more. Japan's entire understanding of American power had been based on long-standing assumptions created years before Pearl Harbor, assumptions repeated in countless meetings and reports. But after Hiroshima, those beliefs began to fall apart. To understand what the High Command finally realized, you must first understand what they had convinced themselves was true. In November 1941, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commander of the Combined Fleet, had given the clearest warning about American industrial strength any Japanese leader ever voiced. His caution, recorded in naval meeting notes, was simple and blunt. I can win for 6 months to a year. After that, I have no confidence at all. Yamamoto had lived in the United States. He understood what Japan was up against, long before everyone else. He had studied at Harvard and worked as a naval attaché in Washington. He had toured American factories and seen their industrial power up close. His conclusions weren't based on emotion or national pride. They were simple math. America's steel production alone was bigger than Japan's entire industrial output. Their oil supply was practically endless compared to Japan's fragile dependence on imported fuel. But the people who needed to listen to Yamamoto's warnings ignored him, and now those same officers were sitting in an underground bunker trying to make sense of what happened to Hiroshima. Army planning papers from 1941, later recovered after the war, show the alternative story Japan's leaders preferred to believe. In their view, America's industrial strength would be defeated by 3 advantages. First was distance. Japan's early victories would create a defensive ring so huge that American supply lines would collapse under the strain. Every ship, plane, and crate of ammunition would need to travel 5,000 miles across dangerous ocean just to reach the battlefield. Japan, they believed, could support its troops from nearby conquered areas while the U.S. exhausted itself trying to keep up. Second was morale. Japanese leaders believed Americans were soft, selfish, and unable to handle heavy casualties. Their planning assumed that if the United States lost 30,000 to 40,000 men, American voters would demand peace. Japanese troops, they believed, would endure longer simply because they were willing to die. Third was tactical superiority. They assumed Japanese troops, through better training and fighting spirit, would inflict such high casualty ratios that American numbers wouldn't matter. According to their doctrine, 1 Japanese soldier was equal to 3 or 4 Americans. Every major battle in the Pacific proved these ideas wrong. Yet each defeat was explained away, not as a failure of the assumptions, but as minor issues that required small adjustments. At Midway in June 1942, Japan lost 4 aircraft carriers in a single day. The official explanation blamed bad luck and tactical mistakes, not American code-breaking or the weakness of relying so heavily on carriers. The belief that Japanese forces could overcome larger U.S. numbers stayed in place. During the Guadalcanal campaign from August 1942 to February 1943, Japan learned that the U.S. could maintain long supply lines and that American troops could match Japanese soldiers in harsh jungle fighting. The formal review blamed field commanders for lacking fighting spirit, not the impossibility of the overall strategy. Again, the belief that the U.S. would break under casualties remained untouched. By August 1945, every major assumption had been crushed by events, yet Japan's top leaders had never openly admitted it. General enemies pushed to keep fighting, even to the point of arming civilians, wasn't foolish. It was simply where those long-held beliefs naturally led. The afternoon of August 6th was the first time during the entire war that the Supreme War Council faced their own illusions head-on. Intelligence officer Colonel Sato presented what he called the reality assessment, a report his team had spent 6 months preparing but had never been allowed to share. The numbers were overwhelming. U.S. aircraft production in 1944 alone was higher than Japan's total aircraft production in the whole war. American shipyards were producing escort carriers faster than Japan could train air crews. U.S. ammunition factories made more shells in a single week than Japan did in a month. But the most devastating figures were about scientific research. Sato's intelligence network found that American research centers had over 130,000 scientists and engineers working on military technology. Japan had about 6,000. Major U.S. universities, Harvard, MIT, Berkeley, Chicago, each had physics programs larger than Japan's entire scientific workforce. The atomic bomb, Sato explained, required massive facilities that Japan couldn't have built even if it knew how. The Americans had built entire secret towns to support the project: Oak Ridge, Hanford, Los Alamos. These locations used more electricity than many Japanese cities combined. They employed 130,000 workers. The Manhattan Project cost $2 billion, more than Japan spent on the entire war in 1944. Foreign Minister Togo asked the question that would later echo through both war crime trials and historical debates: how did we not know? Sato answered quietly, but truthfully, "We didn't know, Foreign Minister. Our intelligence services reported America's industrial expansion constantly. We intercepted messages hinting at large secret projects. We tracked their recruitment of scientists. Every report was dismissed as exaggeration or lies. We refused to accept it because accepting it meant accepting that we could not win." Admiral Toyota added his own harsh conclusion: "The Americans fought this war with one hand tied behind their back. They fought Germany and us at the same time while creating weapons beyond our understanding. They produced more military equipment than we thought possible and kept their civilian economy running better than ours did in peacetime. They are not just stronger. They operate at a different level of civilization." This realization that America wasn't simply more powerful, but fundamentally operating on a different scale, marked a turning point. For 4 years, Japanese propaganda had painted Americans as weak, materialistic, and dependent on machines because they lacked inner strength. The atomic bomb exposed that story as completely false. The psychological shock went beyond military strategy. Cabinet Secretary Hizetsune Sakamiza wrote in his diary that night, "We have been fighting an enemy we never understood. We assumed they thought like us, that their society worked like ours, that their limits matched our limits. Hiroshima shows we were fighting blindly." August 7, 1945 began with news that made the destruction of Hiroshima seem even harder to grasp. Reconnaissance planes that finally managed to enter the radiation zone sent back photos that reached high command within hours. Major Tsunkita Mura, who flew the first successful mission, described weather conditions he had never seen before. Updrafts so strong they pushed his aircraft upward by 2,000 feet in seconds. Air temperatures were so hot they overloaded his instruments. Smoke rising straight into the stratosphere in a single massive column. By 11 a.m., the photos that came back stunned the analyst who reviewed them. They showed something so extreme that many refused to accept it at first. The entire downtown area, roughly 4 square miles, was completely leveled, not destroyed in the usual sense where broken walls and piles of debris remain, but flattened into bare ground. Buildings weren't reduced to rubble, they were vaporized. The reconnaissance team estimated that everything within a 1-mile radius of the blast had disappeared, leaving nothing recognizable behind. Intelligence officers compared these images to damage from normal bombing raids. The worst conventional attack of the war, the American firebombing of Tokyo on March 9 to 10, 1945, had required 334 B-29s dropping over 1,600 tons of incendiaries for 3 straight hours. Hiroshima's destruction was far greater, yet came from one bomb, dropped by one plane, in a single moment. The Supreme War Council met again at 2 p.m. on August 7th with new information that completely changed their understanding of the situation. Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov had summoned Japan's ambassador, Naoto Sato, to the Kremlin at midnight Moscow time. The message was short. The Soviet Union would enter the war against Japan on August 9, 1945. That announcement destroyed Japan's last remaining hope. For months, Japanese officials had desperately tried to get the Soviets to mediate peace talks. The idea, always unrealistic, was that Stalin, who didn't fully trust the US or Britain, might negotiate terms that let Japan keep some territory and avoid total occupation. Once the Soviets declared war, that hope vanished completely. According to people in the room, General Anami went pale when he realized what it meant. Japan was now surrounded with no path to negotiation. American atomic bombs to the east, Soviet armies in the north, British Commonwealth forces pushing from the south, and Chinese resistance still fighting in occupied regions. An empire that once stretched from India's borders across the Pacific was now being squeezed back toward its home islands with overwhelming pressure. Foreign Minister Togo laid out the harsh truth. "We have three choices," he said. "We surrender completely, we keep fighting until every city is wiped out by atomic attacks, or we fight until Soviet and American troops invade and Japan disappears as a nation. There are no other possible outcomes." On August 8th, scattered intelligence reports arrived about Soviet military operations. The Red Army had launched a huge offensive into Manchuria, hitting Japanese positions with overwhelming force. The Guangdong Army, once considered Japan's strongest military formation, was being crushed piece by piece. Soviet tank units advanced nearly 50 miles on the first day, overrunning Japanese resistance quickly. These were the same Soviet forces that had destroyed Nazi Germany, and they were now turning that power toward Japan. This assault also revealed another hard truth about American industry. The Soviets were using thousands of U.S.-supplied trucks, vehicles, and communication equipment from Lend-Lease. American factories had not only supported U.S. forces across two oceans, they had equipped their allies on a scale Japan could hardly imagine. A single American aid program had delivered more material to the Soviets than Japan produced in the entire war. At 11:02 a.m. on August 9th, a second atomic bomb hit Nagasaki. The message from the regional command was even shorter than the one from Hiroshima. Second atomic attack. The city was destroyed. Casualties are severe. Then the line went dead. The emergency meeting of the Supreme War Council that afternoon turned into something unheard of in Japanese military culture: open admission of complete strategic collapse. Navy Minister Admiral Mitsumasa Yanai spoke more honestly than anyone expected in such a setting. "The Americans have shown they can destroy any of our cities whenever they choose," he said. "They can continue doing this endlessly. We have no defense against bombs we cannot detect before they explode. Our anti-aircraft guns are useless. Our fighters cannot intercept what they cannot locate. Our civil defense plans accomplish nothing." Army Chief of Staff General Yamazu added his own assessment, something that would have been considered defeatism only weeks earlier. "The atomic bomb changes everything about warfare," he said. "Large troop concentrations become targets. Cities become targets. Our plan to fight to the last citizen assumes the Americans must invade. But if they can erase entire cities without landing troops, then our whole strategy collapses. They can wipe Japan off the map without ever stepping foot here." Analysts estimated that the U.S. likely had between 3 and 7 more atomic bombs, with the ability to build additional ones. Even if that estimate was wrong, even if America had only one more, the conclusion was the same: continuing the war meant national suicide. Cabinet Secretary Sakamizu recorded the emperor's private remarks that evening. The emperor said that the unbearable must be endured. He stated that the atomic bombs made it clear that continuing the fight would lead to the total destruction of the Japanese people. Japan had to accept terms that kept the nation alive, no matter how painful those terms might be. That idea, the unbearable must be endured, would become the heart of Japan's surrender message. But moving from the emperor's private acceptance to an actual decision to surrender meant confronting military leaders who still resisted despite all the evidence. On August 10th, Japan sent its formal offer to surrender through Swiss diplomatic channels. The message accepted the Potsdam Declaration, but only if the emperor's position remained unchanged. The American reply, delivered on August 12th, was intentionally vague. It said the emperor would be under the authority of the Allied commander, but his ultimate role would be decided by the Japanese people after the occupation began. This uncertainty triggered the final crisis. Hardline officers led by General Anami argued that such terms were unacceptable. They insisted Japan should fight on, not because they believed victory was possible, but because they thought national honor required destruction over occupation. Their stance had nothing to do with strategy anymore. The surrender process continued through late August and early September, but the mental shift within Japan's top leadership had already happened by August 16th. What followed was more than just defeat. It forced Japan's leaders to rethink everything they believed about warfare, industrial power, and Japan's place in the world. The surrender ceremony aboard the USS Missouri on September 2, 1945, forced Japan's representatives to stand in front of the overwhelming American power they had ignored for years. Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu, who signed the documents, later wrote in his diary that the harbor was packed with U.S. warships stretching out to the horizon. There were hundreds of them. Planes filled the sky in tight formations that nearly blocked the sunlight. The Americans didn't need to brag or threaten. Their presence alone showed strength. And this huge force, Shigemitsu noted, was only a small part of the U.S. military, yet it was still larger than anything Japan had ever controlled, even at its peak. General Yashijiro Yamizu, representing Japan's military command, observed that even the location of the ceremony carried a message. They surrendered on a battleship built in American shipyards faster than Japan could plan a major naval mission. The Missouri was just one of many large warships the U.S. produced while fighting across 2 oceans and building atomic bombs. Japan had spent 10 years preparing for war. The Americans put together their war machine in barely over a year and completely overwhelmed them. As U.S. occupation forces arrived in late August, Japanese officers carefully watched and took notes. What they saw matched the intelligence they had long dismissed. The Americans operated with levels of organization, supplies, and technology the Japanese military had never imagined. A single U.S. infantry division had more trucks than the entire Japanese army. U.S. soldiers ate fresh meals while Japanese troops were starving. American hospitals saved men with wounds that Japanese doctors consider hopeless. In September 1945, Intelligence Colonel Sato completed a blunt report titled "Why We Lost." It is now kept in Japan's defense archives. He wrote that Japan really lost the war the moment it attacked the United States in December 1941. Everything after that was simple math. American factories outproduced Japan in every field by 10 to 20 times. Their scientists outnumbered Japan's entire educated population. America had endless access to materials, while Japan depended on captured resources it couldn't hold. Japanese leaders believed courage and spirit could beat machines and industry, and they were wrong. American officials also shared production data with Japanese leaders, which shocked them even further. The U.S. had built over 88,000 tanks, 257,000 artillery guns, more than 2.4 million trucks, 17 million rifles, and 41 billion rounds of ammunition, all while everyday Americans lived better than Japanese civilians ever had, even in peacetime. Former Prime Minister Suzuki admitted that Japanese leaders had completely misread the United States. They assumed Americans cared more about comfort than fighting. Instead, Japan had challenged a country capable of running a booming consumer economy and a massive war machine at the same time. The U.S. never had to choose between military power and civilian prosperity. It had both. As details of the Manhattan Project slowly became known, Japanese scientists realized how far behind they truly were. The project employed 130,000 people and cost $2 billion, more than Japan's entire military budget in 1944. It required building huge facilities that used more power than major cities and relied on physics Japan's scientific community couldn't approach. The atomic bomb was more than a weapon. It was proof that America operated on a different level of science, industry, and organization. Admiral Toyota summarized this reversal in a report written in 1946. At the start of the war, Japanese leaders believed democracy made Americans weak, diversity made them divided, and wealth made them soft. By the end, they had learned the opposite. Democracy encouraged new ideas, diversity created skilled talent, and wealth paid for weapons and technology Japan couldn't match. Every major assumption had been completely backwards. The psychological impact on Japan's military was enormous. Some officers, like General Anami, killed themselves rather than accept how terribly they had misjudged the situation. Others, such as Admiral Yanai, argued Japan needed to abandon militarism entirely because it had blinded them to reality. Many officers simply struggled to understand how the nation they thought could win on spirit alone had marched straight into an unwinnable war based on pride and false beliefs. Historians working under occupation supervision uncovered how often Japanese intelligence warnings were ignored or buried. Reports about U.S. production strength were dismissed as defeatist. Information about American scientific research was labeled bad for morale. Evidence of Japan's losses was spun as temporary setbacks that could be fixed with more fighting spirit. Leaders created an environment where truth was treated like betrayal and optimism became official policy. The harshest realization came last. The United States hadn't even used its full power. America fought a global war while keeping reserves at home, developing new weapons, and planning for future conflicts. The atomic bombs reflected only part of what America could do while juggling many other tasks. Japan had thrown everything it had into the war. America had fought with plenty left over. By 1947, when occupation officials finished interviews with former Japanese commanders, their understanding had completely changed. General Yamizu explained it clearly. Japan lost because it never understood the enemy it attacked. Japanese leaders assumed America shared Japan's weaknesses, limited resources, small industry, rigid thinking, when America actually had the opposite. They trusted propaganda instead of intelligence. The atomic bombs didn't cause Japan's defeat. They simply proved that the war had been unwinnable from the start. Japan learned too late that courage can't beat chemistry, spirit can't replace steel, and determination doesn't matter when the other side has all of that plus 10 times the power to put it into action.